what I needed you for is we got asked in school to interview someone that was like someone that was in a field of work or that inspired you in a field of work that you wanted to go into. And so I thought, what a good opportunity to also meet you as well as do my LO project. So it worked out.
Well, great. So, do you have any questions, or what do you think?
Okay, I got 10 questions for you.
Go ahead.
Okay, what specifies your field of work?
Well, originally my undergraduate work was electrical engineering, graduate work in psychophysiology, biofeedback, so physics of emotion, which today is our 5 major biofeedback apps, flameandmind.com, iThrive.com. But in addition, then I became involved in bioactivefield.com, which is electrical engineering bioactive fields, which became our plasma system. And in the meantime, after I was a systems analyst for IBM for a few years when I was younger, I began traveling the world teaching the physics of consciousness, actually. I was invited to do that after I helped Jirka Raisevi found Gaiam.com. I was the media director there and installed the hardware for the multimedia learned computer animating there in Boulder. And then I was invited to speak at Drindle's International Flower of Life Facilitators Conference in Cave Creek, Colorado, and received a dozen invitations to speak in that many countries that day. And that sort of launched my first world tours. And so originally it was physics of consciousness, physics of feng shui. And then I realized really to be able to teach this, you needed to do it. And so that became the technology. And that's why I began involved in implosion tech, theimploder.com, et cetera. So fairly wide field. And actually, we're having fun. You can read about it all at implosiongroup.com.
Oh, well, so what made you choose this specific field that you entered into?
Well, let's see. I was studying electrical engineering, but I was studying Carl Jung, and then I got very interested in the physics of emotion. And so in graduate work, I was the one designing the polygraph to measure emotion. Actually, my graduate mentor, Albert Axe, one of the founders of the concept of biofeedback, we were documenting the electrical difference between emotions, like the difference between fear and anger, using 8 psychophysiological variables on the polygraph, which I helped build, actually. And so the physics of emotion was my fascination at the time. It started maybe when I realized that you could tell immediately which college student you showed Playboy magazine to by watching their GSR, their fingertip resistance. It was a very fast switch.
And then, what did you do before you started working in the field, or before you decided that you were gonna go into physics and go into researching?
Well, as a kid, I flew model rockets. We lived in a small town, and I was a voracious reader, of course. And but the family business my grandfather started was an electric motor and repair business in the south of Buffalo, New York, which is still there, S&S Electric. And so I started working in the family business, repairing electric motors and electric equipment. So at a very young age, I was messing with electric gadgets. So that's how I ended up in electrical engineering at University of Detroit after I was studied with the Franciscans at St. Francis High School in Athol Springs on Lake Erie in western New York. And so I was kind of a Sparky the motor whiz at a very young age.
And then, do you have any qualifications at all?
Well, my undergraduate degree was, I think, magna cum laude, psychophysiology. My graduate work was not completed, but I did everything that the university gave me for free, and then I was invited to be a systems analyst with IBM, which is quite a credential at that. And then I was vice president of the family business, SS Electric, for many years in western New York, where I successfully invented many things, especially the line of phase converters, which we marketed internationally. And then, media director at Gaiam, which is now pretty famous. And since then, qualifications aren't the issue. There's about, 30,000 YouTube films of me teaching, and we're pretty well known, actually.
And then, do you have any classified pros and cons of your career?
Pros and cons. Well, a pro here is that trying to share information about what is the real science of consciousness, which ends up really being the science of how to build your aura. And that work is incredibly rewarding and feels like the real thing. And so finding a way to share that using technology, but ultimately using passion, is a beautiful thing. On the con side, I would say, increasingly it's virtually impossible to earn a living by teaching, which is, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but for many years, we went around the world every year for 15 years teaching and taught in every major city in Australia, U.S., Europe. We've been around. And doing that for a living is a pretty horrible thing. But, it's a wonderful evolutionary tool. But right now, travel is very unhealthy, usually. And also teaching for a living is economically usually a disaster area. So that's definitely a con. The upside is, if you develop the pure principles behind your teaching and that becomes a technology which is shareable, which is in itself instructive, for example, the plasma system, Theraphi.net, the principles behind it are beautiful, instructive, and yet it's highly economic and it serves people in a very practical, economic way. So I think, for young people, I would say the dream of teaching is a good thing, but in the process become very competent in some technical field, which gives you leverage in other fields.
And then, what would some of your best or proudest moments be, like your best achievements?
Well, recently, the day that we figured out the frequencies that Priory had famously used to heal thousands of cancers fit my new equation, and we decided to build the new plasma system now called Theraphi. That was a proud moment. I said, hey, we're going to prove the principle behind origin of biological entropy. And that was cool. And actually, also, we applied that to brainwaves the day we decided to bring out a new brainwave biofeedback system, flameinmind.com, which proves the principle. So I love it when you build something which proves the principle that you invented, and then you sell it, and then you're successful. So not only have you proved the principle, but you sold it. And so, it used to be in olden times, well, you prove something by publishing. Well, I think that's crap. Actually, we do publish, and I am published. But how you actually prove something is you make it practically sellable. And when you have commercial success, that's far more compelling than any sort of academic reward of any kind, actually, because that gives you serious grounded leverage. So another advice here is to be grounded. Yes.
You get a physical representation of the proof.
Get a technical expertise and apply it physically and build something that renders a high level of service that is in itself sellable.
What would you consider an inspiration for your ideas and thoughts? Like what gets your ideas running? What gets your brain running?
Yeah, that might be a little bit of a tricky question. That when I was... my parents had to come and rescue me. They thought I had fallen into a cult when I went and quit. When I went and quit IBM as a systems analyst, which is a totally un-American thing to do, and went off to the Gurdjieff School. Oh my God. And so instead of being a systems analyst with IBM, I was off studying some weird cosmic whatever that my parents were convinced was a cult. And, from their point of view, well, we can understand that. But in that process, when I went to the Gurdjieff School, it's interesting. My teacher at the IBM school in Chicago, Illinois, was actually a person who had spent much of his life studying Gurdjieff theory of spirituality. And so my teacher at IBM ended up dumping me into a spiritual quest. But while I was at the Gurdjieff school, I was doing the sacred gymnastics. So there I was, effectively stuck in my head, but we were living in George Washington's nephew's pig farm and doing such intense sacred gymnastic that the floor would almost steam on the cold days. And those sacred gymnastics triggered something which later I found out was Kundalini, which is basically a metabolic climax drives the spine liquid pump intensively and your top of your head blows off. And I wrote lots of articles, goldenmean.info/Kundalini. And so the physics of instead being pronounced insane, which is the classic medical diagnosis of what Kundalini is, they call you schizophrenic. Well, instead of doing that, I was adopted by the Ben Bentoff, who wrote the book on the biomechanics of Kundalini, and with graduate psychophysiology, I figured out what it was, which is basically your brain becoming so centripetal, it's a climax past the concept of bliss where it burns. And that flame is the definition of all information. It is literally what the ancestors called access to the collective voice. So if you know how to speak to that flame, and it's literally flameinmind.com, you kind of can get answers to almost anything you're interested in, actually.
Yeah. Wow.
And then, what were the main struggles or difficult points you experienced before getting where you are currently?
Well, I was working at the family business in Western New York, SS Electric, for many years. And then we founded a community in North Carolina, which was actually, the dome was installed by John Denver from Bucky Fuller, and I knew Bucky Fuller personally. But there were lots of dramas, which were very painful, for sure. A lot of it was economic, but starting a community is, in retrospect, a pretty difficult thing to do. And so it's called Circle of Life in Waynesville, North Carolina, actually. And so there was some ups and downs, that's for sure. And I ended up living alone a lot, and when you travel. But now I have a French lady, Valerie, and who loves to travel, and we're doing kind of wonderful. So ups and downs are good, I suppose, if you can. Actually, the physics is quite simple. In the midst of the more stress you're in, the more you're able to relax, the more you can be conductive. And that is so profound because it even applies to whether you can benefit from Theraphi. Ability to relax in the presence of stress is a real turning point.
That actually reminds me of something. Within steel hardening, you experience it to as much heat as possible to harden the steel so that it can create a difference in the molecular buildup so that it can resist further stresses further on.
It's a good, actually, during my graduate studies, I was quality control at Production Steel, Whitaker Steel Strip in Detroit, Michigan, and my job was to do the lab calibration of the annealing process by actually studying the molecular geometry in the steel to make sure it would handle the rocker arm impression to make Chryslers in Detroit, Michigan. And the annealing process, that heat, changes the molecular cluster size to make them smaller and more malleable. A very good metaphor. And also, by the way, that heat and pressure, molecular cluster size is exactly what we deliver made smaller with the imploder.com. Implosion tech makes that solubility possible. So very good metaphor.
What goals do you have for your future? Like, what are you working towards right now?
We are fortunate enough to be successful in a fair number of fields now. In the plasma, we have new partners in the stem cell group. We're proving our plasma can be a powerful tool in stem cell work. And that's wonderful, and all of that's happening. Our bioactive field theories are happening great. Things are good. However, I have a theory of gravity, which I am passionately pushing, and not so much to say that, people need to accept my theory of gravity. I don't really care. No, we're building things that make gravity. There's the crossfire fusion system. There's the Koski-Frost system. It was called warp factor. We're going to be teaching that next week at fractalu.com when we do JediSchool.Science, our website also. And basically, it is about the physics of gravity. Because you see, so there's two linked passions here. A passion, obviously, is to create something teachable that can impress young people enough to make decisions to follow their bliss and do the hygiene to build their aura, spiritual science, which we now call JediSchool.Science. And that's the subject for a new Jedi science. And a core part of that, you see, and we're going to explain this Sunday, is that what the definition of the term Jedi in the raising of the Jedi in Egypt was plasma projection, which is what you need to do in order to make propulsion and replace every form of transportation on the planet. And even that's boring, actually. No, what's fun is it's the only way you get to steer when you lucid dream and when you die. That is the origin of propulsion. It's how the Nazi Bell and the Vimana flew. It's a particular spiral on a torus. It's implosive, it's centripetal. It teaches a vast new physics, which says, oh, this is negentropic, it's centripetal, it's self-organizing. There's such, I mean, it's almost like we haven't invented the wheel yet on this planet because we don't know why objects fall to the ground. So I am very passionate because when we know why objects fall to the ground, then we can know what people are for and what to do at the time of death. So yes, I think we've got some fun stuff to do yet.
And would you recommend your career to the current youth to strive for? Like, would you say that kids with a mind for it or kids currently in school should try and spend time to listen, read up, and possibly pursue your career?
Well, good question. I mean, I once joked that if you look in the employment ads under the job title Mystic, you find very little. However, what I've done is combined a mystical interest with electrical engineering, and that I recommend highly. So I would make some comment, like bopping around Europe, particularly France here. I find the number of young people studying physics or engineering is none, zero. You don't find any young, it's not, people don't understand that you're disempowered in your world unless you have a serious physics and science, electrical engineering background. That's what's pure principle. And it isn't the credential, it's the actual understanding of pure principle. So yes, you need a technical skill, which is powerful, whatever interests you, but a technical skill. And the second thing is, as a young person, whatever your school or institution is, you must adopt a lifestyle that charges your aura, or you will not succeed. That means you can't spend all day in a metal building with dead air and electrosmog, or you're not going to graduate with anything. So unless you learn how to build your aura even while you're in school, you're not going to make it. So actually learning the process of what gets your aura charged is just about as important as going to school.
I'd say it seems like it's possibly even a little more important.
Exactly.
It seems like it's a larger thing that changes your life in the future rather than at the current. Because school seems to be completely revolved around one thing and one thing only, and that's getting you through life right now and not really worrying about what kind of thoughts you're going to have in the future, because they try to teach you things that aren't specified to who you want to be in, what kind of fields you want to be in. They just teach you the norm. But if you learn to build your aura and build your own personalized energy, it seems like it'd be more important for your future.
I think that's well said. I mean, it is kind of shocking that in addition to not knowing why objects fall to the ground, all of your teachers in school, very few of them have any real concept from a scientific perspective of what are people for, So obviously, you can't depend on your school teachers sometimes for knowing the important things in life. You really have to find it out for yourself. But that might turn out to be good news. But you're right. The actual process, if you get a very large aura, you have everything you need, because in there contains all the information. You can ask the questions inside. It's the phone line to God. Big aura is very important. But the thing is, actually, there's something else about having a big aura, which, like in the Theraphi.net plasma field, if you charge your aura a lot, you will lose it unless you learn grounding, because it puts your aura charge bubble in phase relationship to the fractal Earth, and thus, so people who have lots of intense spiritual experience often get labeled schizophrenic unless they understand what grounding means. Deep breathing, read the book Earthing, all that good stuff, because it establishes phase relationship to Earth, therefore ground, therefore to charge distribution efficiency, which is why fractality defines grounding for electrical engineers and psychologists. It's why, They don't publish it, but anybody that lives over about the third floor in any building, in high buildings, actually has a horrible relative disease rate versus people that live near the Earth. And that's actual real medicine. And the reason is simple, because you need access to those Schumann harmonics. Of course, in most buildings, the Schumann harmonics don't make it in anyway. But the fact is, that is your phone line to God, so to speak. So access to Schumann harmonics is probably one of the most important educational lessons there is, and you can't learn it in a metal school building, because Schumann harmonics don't make it there.
So would it be possible at all to build a building that amplifies, or allows these Schumann harmonics in, or maybe even amplifies them as a source?
Well, that's the right question. I mean, obviously, that's the reason all the great pyramids were based on the dodecaecosa Earth grid energy line, specifically for the longitudinal embedding, which is not just gravity wave, but phone line to God. So yes, an implosive capacitance is the definition of living architecture, which basically is why a living cell is so fractal. So we need to reinvent architecture once we understand what people are for, and we've been teaching that for years. Biological materials, and our curriculum on that is probably the most famous on the planet, Golden Mean.Info/ Architecture. And our international conferences on that were successful, and people are getting it. So we now know the physics of why biological materials are required for architecture, and not steel and aluminum, because your aura capacitance cannot breathe. It's called dielectric constant.
So when they're still considered rare earth materials, so iron ore, would that still have a negative effect on these waves, or is it the fact that it's processed? And
so that's the right question. Obviously, the body needs and loves iron, and in the geometry of what holds oxygen in blood, that's how we name Skanda, fire, Adam, the red man. It's gorgeous stuff. However, the heat that turned the iron into steel turns it into the opposite of fractality, and that's measured as the loss of dielectric. That's measured as the loss of dielectric constant. And that is even worse in the case of bauxite turned into aluminum. So basically what you're doing is freezing those molecules and atoms out of fractality, therefore out of charge distribution efficiency, they call misqualified energy, and therefore it is literally pain to your aura to simply be in the presence of aluminum, because every atom in there is in pain once you know the definition of pain, which is the loss of the charge distribution, because fractality is bleeding.
So even though we're exposed to aluminum constantly, it is a negative to us. It covers everything.
You will never find a living plasma ball, an orb, or a ghost in an aluminum box. And it's about the fastest way to kill a germinating seed. So sending your kid to an aluminum steel box for school is a sin against life force, that's for sure. And it's because people need to know that if your aura cannot breathe into something, you cannot embed and become centripetal inside. And so this is not my body instead of this is my body. So, Steiner was right. All the children biodynamically can touch only living material, living fabric, living stone, and living wood. And the children are never to touch plastic or steel or things like that, because it literally bleeds the aura. It's very easy to find out. If you put an aluminum steel coin in your pocket, it gets abnormally hot, abnormally fast, because it's sinking all of the capacitive inertia out of your body. Your aura is literally bleeding, which is the definition of pain.
So this molecular structure, would this differentiate because of how we've changed it, or would it be considered because of the density?
Well, because we are so dumb not to know what life force is, which is charge distribution efficiency, which in electrical engineering is called dielectric constant, then we misqualified energy. If you look at some of the greatest catastrophes in Western culture, they involve aluminum plants, because the plant that makes aluminum is one of the most painful possible things for the Earth's aura. There's all these, you can look it up, there's huge, huge catastrophes involving aluminum plants, because the Earth is saying, oh, you're killing me, you're killing me. And people are too stupid to understand that it's simple. Where charge cannot distribute efficiency, mind cannot go. That's why tornadoes are so anxious to destroy metal trailer parks. They go out of their way to kill them, because it's their pain. It's actually
So
probably what. Yeah.
it seems like one of the biggest problems is aluminium itself.
Well, yeah, in spiritual in spiritual terms, the ETs have talked about this. They call it misqualified energy. If you take a structure that was fractal, like something that had been some part of life, biological material, and you rearrange those atoms to the opposite of fractality, measured as dielectric constant, where capacitance can't breathe, the aura of everything alive and everything mindful is frozen. So, they're saying that the mind of God is everywhere, but it's actually not true. The mind of God is present where charge can implode, and where charge cannot implode, your inner voice doesn't work so good. It's very simple.
So then, has any experimentation been done with caging techniques? So, taking aluminium and creating a sphere and putting something that has a high life force within it, what occurs?
Well, I think there have been plant growth trials. I think we can easily prove that an aluminum pot is a fast way to kill a germinating seed, but now we know why. But people that talk about this electrosmog sensitivity, and they say, well, maybe if I build the perfect Faraday cage. But actually, a Faraday cage is something that will keep out most electromagnetic frequencies, but only in transverse electromagnetics. So a Faraday cage did not prevent Ingo Swann from heating his thermistor with his mind at a distance repeatedly in the lab and measuring it, because the longitudinal EMF, which is how mind travels, goes right through a Faraday cage. It's a long story, but the short summary is a cage to isolate charge is not the solution. No. What you want is perfect embedding. So perfect embedding means you need to go where you have perfect transparency to charge at a place where that charge is perfectly fractal. That's the only way you can embed the long wave, like the planet mind and the solar mind, etc. It's why, Luke Skywalker, talk about this Sunday, Luke Skywalker had to go deep under nature for Yoda to teach him how the Force could be with him, because the Force is living plasma.
So,
You're self-aware.
the optimum would be synchronicity with the electromagnetics and the waves of the Earth to try and sync that with living creatures.
Yeah,
That synchronicity would be what would be optimal for the living.
because the longer wave that you can embed in your body, obviously Coulomb ratio solves that problem, the bigger the being that you can feel. So that's why anybody that's wise is looking for the perfect, where the most nature is focused. Everybody's seeking that quote-unquote sacred space. We know exactly what sacred space is. It's perfect embedding. It's implosive charge. We know where the Kogi went to make phone calls to ancestors. We've measured it. So people are seeking that perfect experience, getting on jet airplanes where their aura is destroyed to go locate sacred space, and they don't know what it is. So perfect embedding, perfect place where charge can implode, puts your mind in the center of all those long waves and allows you to gather inertia. That's where the Force is with you. So it is true, there probably is no substitute for nature, actually, in this sense. The thing is, all of this is...
Would you consider, okay, an example is someone building a house and filling that house up with plant life and trees and overgrowth, practically having a mini forest within their house? Would that still an optimum or no?
Well, it's a good start. I mean, if you look at our biologic architecture curriculum, goldenmean.info/architecture, you'll see that you start by making a magnetic map of the site. You need the magnetic cross line point, which is where you get telepathy and sacred space. And the only way you can start a labyrinth or a Gothic cathedral. Then you know where the life force is concentrated. And then you know where the local sort of DNA radio works, the same way you build a labyrinth. And then you use a slate basement and you do all these things to enable the charge to become centripetal. So a little geobiology skill at the beginning of building a house. But effectively what you're building is a living capacitor. And we have a detailed curriculum about that.
So it would be considered optimal to try and bring in as much nature or possibly get nature as possible. The activity of metal and other sources.
And you know that every indigenous ancient people always had this sense of where their ancestors' burial ground was, because that was the library of survival memory. And so their electrical relationship to that and the grid, song line, dreaming track, etc. So the magnetic map introduces you, because ancestral memory is a big part of the wind in your sails, and that's a big issue when you're choosing architecture as well. Our biologic architectures are very knowledgeable about that.
Something interesting was what ancestors always did is every morning they'd go for a prayer or something, and where it doesn't matter where they were or what tribe or clan they were or whatever, they would always try to find a forest and go deep into the middle of it, find a clearing where there's a lot of moisture, normally a dip or a crevice or a valley, and all kneel and pray there, because I would assume that that would be a main point within.
That's right. And as we measured how the Kogi phoned their ancestors by the capacitance of their sacred space in the book Kin of Atta, they would sleep in a spiral and collectively remember their lucid dream, which eventually allows them to lucid dream as a group, which gives them the critical inertial mass to take their collective plasma body through the heart of the star, which is actually how you grow up. So, actually a soul group is critical to ultimate survival in that sense. It's real.
How would that actually work? How would you manage to link a dream? Because the dream state, what describes a dream state?
Well, we now, the physics of death is well described. Ray Moody and the Clouvet form constants, golden mean.info/immortality, that there is literally the sequence of visions is charge implosion, so it's a little black hole. Well, the same way you enter a dream, if you've doused where your bed is, which is critical, which is basically it needs to be a place where the magnetic map looks like a rose, you get that centripetal force. Now, if a group they do their yoga together, they do their crying together, eventually they bond. They can feel each other's pain so well, they can lucid dream together. And that is powerful.
So it's a connection on a mental and physical state.
Well,
So knowing
the categories mental and physical here are pretty arbitrary. It's actually the bonding of the plasma cocoons they call it point pairing. They can merge. It's the physics of Tantra. It's the physics of joining auras in such a way that it gains critical inertial escape velocity. And that's what this planet needs desperately. We can then steer our tornadoes and steer the solar wind.
Okay, you can if you have any advice for you. You can ask me if you've got any advice for you.
yeah, that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
What would be like? What would your advice be for someone that is interested in the field?
Well, how would you describe your most passionate interest now?
I can't.
What intrigues you? What intrigues you?
Just honestly, knowledge on a general scale. So for me, figuring out what's going on and how to manipulate that efficiently is just interesting for me. I always kind of found physics a little more interesting than biology, but biology at the moment is interesting. Do you know about the Cas9 and the CRISPR whole thing? That's quite funny for me. So they've discovered a gene within bacteria called CRISPR, which is an archive. It takes in, so bacteriophage often attack bacterium. About 40% of bacteria die every single day from bacteriophage. It's the only thing that kills more than humans do. And if bacterium ever survive an attack from a virus, which what they do is they dump their genetic DNA into a virus and try to overtake the cell, what they do is they introduce a system called CRISPR. They store that DNA in an archive, and then if ever they're attacked again, they load a protein called Cas9 with an identical copy from an RNA, and that Cas9 system checks all of the genes that are inserted into the bacteria and cuts out the identical DNA to kill the virus straight away. So we're now using that to modify genes to try and possibly remove genetic disorders. We're going to try and invent a system of Cas9 to swap around singularities within the DNA code to try and remove genetic disorders. And then we've experimented with giving Cas9 the HIV virus and found that it can remove up to 50% of all HIV within a living, well, we used mice.
Mm-hmm. Now it's a beautiful science there, and it seems like you have already a beautiful introduction to the molecular biophysics there. So it seems like you could make a serious contribution, which is fabulous. The side of that I would suggest might really sort of get even more fascinating would be when we recognize that the recognition algorithms to trigger the start of those processes is always recognizing the field effect of a molecular geometry. So ultimately, it's an electric field that triggers the response mechanism.
Yeah.
So for example, when we know that the Theraphi triggers a cell to grow, and we know that growing a cell really happily is the essence of mesenchymal stem cell. So you make a cell really happy, and that T cell can go in and be a stem cell and kill all the cancer. So step one is that T cell had to get the kind of charge in its aura, which is responding to a field effect, to make it powerful enough to then be called a stem cell. And the thing that fascinates me then, and I admire your study of the biochemistry there, but the thing that sort of fascinates me is we called the stem cell a stem because it went back to the root of fractality in its structure. Literally the root of the fractal growth pattern at the base of the spine is where the stem cell is. But what's called time reversal there is actually only negentropy. It only goes back to increased order, never to less order. Time reversal is always negentropic, to increased order. Meaning that then if you have the right kind of field effect, you can trigger that cell to go back to the root of its fractal. Dedifferentiation is called. So the role of field effects in triggering these reactions is ultimately key. And what field becomes negentropic? So my suggestion is combined with what you're already interested in there, which is beautiful, to understanding what geometry molecularly produces self-organization, negentropy, how a stem cell becomes a stem, literally, at the root of the fractal, called dedifferentiation, which we now believe. And our new partners are some of the world leaders in stem cell research, offering literally to develop Theraphi with us, because that physics is so relevant to what we're doing, fractalfield.com.
So how did you define that the Theraphi caused cells to grow and cells to rapidly increase in metabolism?
Well, you know that it was Claire there in South Africa by you who showed the dramatic response of plants to Theraphi plasma. It's a global phenomenon. The plants in the room almost generally grow dramatically faster with the Theraphi plasma. That has been observed many times. But the accelerated growth is basically improved charge distribution efficiency, obviously. So if you get centripetal, you get more life force because the charge distribution improves efficiency. But now the stem cell people are recognizing that that's the essence of dedifferentiation, getting a cell to go back to the root where it includes all of its original information if it's in a centripetal fractal implosive, what we call phase conjugate field, which is what the Theraphi is.
You don't know what to. You can tell him, Dad.
I have a question.
Yeah. There's a question.
But are you done
And then we just tell him.
asking?
No.
Are you done asking the main question? Yeah.
He can't stop talking to Dad. That's the problem.
Oh, okay.
He can't stop talking to you, Dad. Caide
We
doesn't
have
want to
fun.
stop talking
Good.
to you.
It was good.
Ask.
He's gonna say bye.
How are you?
Nice to meet you. Oh,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
saw you here in
Yeah.
France. Nice to see you there. You look great. Great smile. Cool.
Yeah. Good to sort of meet you again.
Really. You guys survived so much drama here in France, and you're still. It's all wonderful.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Everything's good now. We still haven't gotten our passport yet, but we have to re-get our passports. Yeah.
I'm glad you're getting the Theraphi there. It's great, and I'm really delighted to meet your young friend here. We're doing great. It's a wonderful conversation. We really want to inspire young people, so we appreciate it.
I was all listening in. Kantha, I'm sure, was also finding all the stuff fascinating there.
Much very
The two brains working.
I think Caide needs a natural change.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. So nice to meet you. Nice to talk to you. And we can talk again anytime you want there.
I'm going to have to pick your brain about the stem cells one of these days.
Yes. Actually, we're going to be having major announcements on that very soon with our new partners. So, Caide, to be continued. Thank you very much. Meantime, may the force be with you.
I have one question. Just in watching some of your videos with Mark Rawbar.
Yes.
His name?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I would be lying if I said I understood all of the maths that he goes on, seeing that he's pretty clued up with the mathematics. In terms of the ether, well, the concept of the ether, is the ether plasma, or is a plasma the result of some interaction with regard to the ether?
That's like saying, if the force is with you, is everything the force? No, but a physicist would say that plasma is 99.999% of the universe. Conventional physics is clear about that. And if we now know that plasma is a name for a cloud of charge, and cold plasma is a cloud of charge that can be centripetal without heat, which we now know is the problem phase conjugate centripetal force solves. So a cloud of charge or plasma is basically 99.99% of you. And so what else is there? That other 0.001%. Actually, when charge rotates, it stores inertia, and that's called mass. And when that same charge rotates, it has a period, and that's called time. So you don't bend space-time. Einstein was wrong in that sense. You bend the path of charge. And you see, that universe called the ether is simply a superfluid, and the compression and rarefaction in that fluid is called plus and minus charge. So once you understand that exists and nothing else, you understand the unified field, and you understand that when it rotates, it stores inertia, that superfluid called mass, and has a period called time. So suddenly charge is everything, and that helps you understand how this concept of ether is just that superfluid of charge, and really is the unified field.
Sure. Okay. So it is kind of like, I suppose, plasma.
That's,
it would be safe to.
Yeah, plasma is a cloud of charge that then is normally localized. That's why we call it plasma, like ball lightning or like orbs. But normally it takes heat to keep that charge rotating outside of its normal electron shells. And that's why the concept of cold plasma was so radical. But now cold plasma, not just Theraphi, but all cold plasma, called cold atmospheric plasma, is famous for healing. And now we know why, because for plasma to be cold, it has to be centripetal and negentropic, which is to say charge is negentropic, which is the essence of the healing process in many senses.
Okay, awesome. I don't know how much time you have. I don't want to ask too many questions.
Well, if you have one more, did you have anything else? That's good.
Okay. Well, there's a lot, but let me just ask one brief one. It's kind of going sidetracking. Your view and someone like Nassim's view, which seems to have a lot of similarities. Okay, now I won't ask this one. I want to ask the other one. The other one is your main view on like the geometry of this ether is basically dodecahedral. Am I correct in understanding that?
Actually, conventional physics is clear that the dodecahedron is the geometry of the universe, Earth grid, DNA. That's old information. The new information is why the dodecaecoconstellation, which is clearly the DF electron subshells, is the only geometry of radiance that golden ratio self-organizes. So if you self-organize into golden ratio, which I proved is how hydrogen got invented, you make dodecastellation. So dodeca is the 3D geometric expression of golden ratio perfected. That's why the dodecahedron is dominant. DNA, for example.
And how does that differ from someone like Nassim Harameyn's Flower of Life and the tetrahedrons and all of those?
Well, Nassim did a wonderful service getting a lot of people interested, but I believe Nassim may have erred a little bit in suggesting that tetrahedral stellation is fractal, because we actually proved that the tetracube stellation, which is simply exponents of the powers of 2, actually maximizes destructive charge interference and is the opposite of compressibility. Therefore, from that view, where you define compressibility, perfect infinite compression, as the essence of the definition of fractality, in that view, dodecaecosa is perfectly fracta, and tetracube is the opposite of fractality. So, but I think also Nassim didn't realize the cause of gravity either in that sense, because he didn't understand. He did get golden ratio in black holes. That was wonderful work. But actually translate that into making gravity, he tripped over with his magnetic flux in a toroid. But actually understanding gravity technology requires probably actually implementing that, not just in a fluid, but actually in capacitance, which is what Koski frost is. You can read about that at fractalfield.com/propulsion.
Okay.
Right, nice.
I better.
Let Caide say
We,
goodbye.
we had some fun there.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Thank you for your handsome friends there, Caide. Really great to meet you guys.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Please, can you send me the recording?
I will send you the recording, and I invite you guys to France again anytime.
Oh, that would be lovely. Dan, the dollar has gotten, well, the